Thank you for everyone who's tuning in. Today we have with us Aditya Shukla, who is he is an applied psychologist from Pune, India, who is also a musician and runs a blog, Cognition Today. I found his blog, I think through Facebook. I read one of his posts about memory models, and it was very well written. And I thought I would get in contact with him and see if he wanted to present with us, and he graciously said yes. So Aditya,
thanks for having me here, man.
Yeah, of course, and thank you for joining us. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into psychology and how you started running up your blog and things?
Oh yeah, sure. So I got my bachelor's in psychology out of interest. I took the best option, that is on the side of abstraction and abstract workings of something. It was either doing mathematics or psychology. I chose psychology because undergrad was a little easier. Continued for master's, did clinical psychology. Really loved everything I was studying. And then I decided to head on to freelance work, where I would write and help industry leaders. So I would look at how they would try to get a workforce to, say, commit to work better or design products or something of that sort. So anywhere psychology was required, I would try to step in. That's how I got to the applied side of psychology. Been doing that for a couple of years. My musical background begins when I was 10. I've always been a interested musician, never lost touch. Been playing for a couple of years now, almost 2 decades now. And yeah, still into it.
Very cool.
And the reason why I started my blog is because I want to get information, as much access as possible, useful information.
So your day-to-day life is essentially boiling down research articles, right? And then trying to apply it for businesses and other practical purposes?
That is correct.
I see. So what are you going to be talking with us today about?
So today, as the title suggests, I'm going to look at applications of cognitive psychology. Basically, I'm going to show you how to get your hair like in my photo.
I don't know if we want to go that far. So anyway, I'll let you get to your presentation. I just want to also say to any listeners, feel free to type in the chat if there's any audio issues or if you have any questions or comments. And we may interrupt during the talk, or we have a extended discussion afterwards. It's about a 15-minute presentation. And without any further ado, Aditya, you can go ahead.
Yeah, let's dive in. Okay, so there is a whole body of information which looks at the integration of multiple senses and how we end up perceiving. That's kind of the unified area that we are applying today. Cross-modal perception and a couple of its offshoots. So one thing I want to really look at here is experience designing. How does a human enter any setting, be it a restaurant, be it work, a classroom, or just a social setting, or maybe even a date? How can their experience be enhanced using information that we have from research? So we're going to apply some research to design 2 types of experiences. One, reading, and one, food and dining. So let's look at the first application, completely based on cross-modal perception. This is designing an experience for, say, food packaging, how people enjoy drinks, what makes them order more drinks, what is the hedonic value of eating something, or just looking at food and lusting for it. The other application is using fonts to, say, improve certain aspects. We'll get to that soon. And then just a couple of ideas we'll discuss much later. So the roadmap is clear so far. Let's move on. Many of you might have seen this sort of an experiment before. It's quite famous and entered a lot of best-selling books. The Tiki Baba experiment. The essence of what we are looking at right now is that there are two shapes we can perceive. They all have attributes that can be defined in a certain way. Our job as someone who's taking the experiment would be to decide which of the shape is called Kiki, K-I-K-I, and which of the shape is called Bouba, B-O-U-B-A. So it turns out that about 90-95% of the people think that the jagged starry shape on the left is Kiki and the other one is Bouba. Why does this happen? There are a couple of reasons, but we won't get into all the reasons right away. So yeah, quick facts about the Tiki Baba experiment. We know that this is happening before someone consciously looks at the shapes. We know that it is not always reliable. We know non-autistic populations have a consistency of say 90-95% matching and agreement, but just about 50%, which is a chance event for the autistic population. It's interesting why that happens, but that's not the focus today. We also know primates and babies exhibit this effect. So it turns out that we can actually extend this whole paradigm and compare all sorts of stimuli and say classify them as either Kiki or Bouba. And that's actually where the application lies. A second layer of congruence and incongruence between two stimuli. Let's look at what that means. But before that, I'm sure you're wondering, why have I written things in such a weird font? Can you all notice how irregular this is? Yeah, I think it is an ugly font. We'll get back to why the font is so weird in our second application. Until then, let's stick to our Tiki Baba application. So congruence is basically when something about one feature matches Kiki and that is paired with something of another feature that is mapped to Kiki. So in this experiment, we're going to look at salt and sugar and tortilla chips and soft bread. People tend to associate salt, the taste of salt, with Kiki and the taste of sugar with Bouba. So now tortilla chips, which is basically a crispy thing to eat, the tactile feedback we have, the sound it makes, the clink sound, that is associated with Kiki. So the mixture of tortilla chips and salt is a congruent mixture. The same goes with soft bread and sugar. That's congruent because they are both mapped onto Bouba. And we also have incongruence. Soft bread and salt, they don't really match on the level of Kiki or Bouba. The same goes with sugar and tortilla chips. So we're going to look at the second layer of cross-modality and apply it in the food and dining sector. Okay, a lot of text on the next 2 or 3 slides. This is for those who will watch the video on YouTube later and would like to pause the screen if at all they want to do that. Okay, so food shape. Let's just look at a cake. It's circular, it's round. That roundness is usually associated with Bouba. Packaging, something else, we can have a very sharp, edgy packaging, pointy maybe, we can associate that with Kiki. But a governing fact over here is that we have research insights for each of these highlighted points over here. Let's look at chocolates. People expect a level of sweetness or a sourness or bitterness based on how the chocolate looks. And this expectation is quite important. Round chocolates are perceived to be sweeter and creamier than angular chocolates, just because of their cross-modal association. But then after eating that, the expectation is kind of let down because the shape of the chocolate pushed the sweetness or the creamier, which is basically a booba aspect, in a direction which is more in amplitude. So when they bite the chocolate and have the initial taste, it's a little lesser. It's probably more towards the average expected. We have other things too here. We can look at color and odor. We can look at how things are packaged. Now, when you package something, we want to create first impressions. When we create first impressions and we want to convert a food item's sale, we might want to use certain hacks, which we can use from the Tiki Baba experiment. We can have a very nice, roundish, soft name for something which is sweet, or we can have a very edgy, aggressive name for something which packs a punch. So maybe we can have a new hot sauce with a very kicky name and a sweet onion sauce with a very soft name. We also have drink colors which have a interaction with expectation as well as how things taste. Now here the important thing is the balance. The dark red colored nature of strawberry can actually compound the sweetness of the drink, but a lighter version might actually counteract that effect and have maybe a less sweet drink. So these are just research insights. We don't have to go through all of them, but this is the nature of insights here. One interesting thing which a lot of people have observed in general, which can be confirmed with research here, is that across most countries in the world, people have a different experience with the exact same coffee based on what sort of a mug it is served in. We have more aroma coming out with just a narrow diameter. Now the taste is not really changing, it's the same coffee that everyone else is having, but you change the mug. Features of that mug are now interacting with taste and changing the whole expectation. And that expectation might also change perceived taste. There's something about beer here. There are a lot of festivals where people go out, they have beer in plastic cups. So an interesting experiment is that people actually like beer coming from the bottle. This might have to do a lot with how that bottle is shaped. Maybe the popping freshness or the touch of a cold bottle in your hand than maybe a can or a plastic cup. The thing I discussed with you about coffee, the same applies with Coca-Cola. Somehow we have this brand image of a perfect Coca-Cola glass, and that's when it tastes the best.
So to briefly interrupt with a comment from the chat, basically they asked what is the meaning of perceiving the stimulus as kiki or booba, and I guess what you're saying is that people have these intrinsic connections to think of kiki as, say, the sharper, spikier shape, and these sort of intrinsic connections can also be applied to more realistic stimuli instead of shapes, say Coca-Cola being in a bottle or a can, right?
Exactly, yes. So we are looking at applying the same paradigm to something which is tangible in the real world, something which people are acquainted with.
All right, cool.
Okay, should I continue?
Yep. Unless the viewer has another question, but I'll interrupt you if that's the case.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to look at one other point in this whole food-based design experience. Expectations can change quite a bit, and what we have found is that the whole Tiki Baba paradigm can also be attached to, say, colors and lighting. So if a food can be mapped to a certain color, for example, if you can associate pizza with yellow or orange, or it can associate a Subway sandwich with brown or any other color, if there's some consistency over here across a whole population, it might actually increase surprise or likability. That's an interesting finding because people sometimes want to go and eat outside for an experience, not for the hunger they have. Actually, let's go with the motion in food point as well. Something you have seen in advertisements all the time, and I suppose this is by design. It's deliberate. We have fatty substances like cheese or mayo sauce, mayonnaise, dripping, and that's quite attractive. Maybe pouring hot chocolate. The motion might actually stimulate us a little more in wanting it. Dr. Charles Spence, he's the main researcher who has conducted a lot of experiments in this cross modality in food. So what are the overarching themes? That's a little more important here. Sounds of a certain kind can influence the taste of expectations. So we can pair maybe a jazzy song with something like beer and chicken wings. That might have some sort of a congruence. Maybe that can create an experience for a casual bar setting. So the thing is, a lot of these applications might have already come up without the research in a few places, because that's how businesses might figure things out. They might have iterations and they might converge on something that works for them. Then we have angular shapes and a bitter taste. We have round shapes and a sweet taste. So basically shapes really matter over here. And people from around the world have some level of agreement in how things are perceived.
About all these overarching themes and more cross-modal experiences when it comes to real-world applications, has anyone linked the actual psychological study using Kiki and Booba to these results?
Yes, that actually has happened, and Charles Spence, he has in fact worked with a couple of chefs to design these experiments. I think he has done this in France, and he's, I think, a professor in Oxford. Not entirely sure, but I have 5 points over here which show the real world side of these experiments.
Like, for instance,
you want to lower sugar content, what you can actually do is make something rounder, make something map onto Booba so the expected sugar can actually influence taste in some way. At least if someone is having a sugar craving, that might help a little bit.
I see.
We can change the expected strength of beverages by, say, making a Long Island iced tea more transparent. Perhaps that's a possibility. So these points, the main important thing is that there is a proof of concept that businesses and other entrepreneurs might want to work on first. They might apply these ideas and gain proof of concept from the people who are consuming these products. This is something which is not totally being done, something I'm trying to introduce in my locality here, but I suppose a lot of people do appreciate. I'll tell you a quick short story of a guy. There's this forum called Chef It, and I talked with a chef from there. His school had surprisingly low amounts of healthy food content eating, and he couldn't get the students to eat as much as is required. So he changed features of the food, he changed the whole dining room, every little thing, based on the book Charles Spence has written on the same topic. And he saw a significant rise in how this can manipulate the dining and eating experience, and it was for the better. So yeah, people are doing this in the real world. They're using it to different extents. Perhaps it'll penetrate the real world a little more soon after, say, this becomes a traditional way to think. Okay, so other applications of cross-modal correspondence. This is something that we do every day. We use smileys or emoticons or emojis to send people messages. We also react to them quite a bit. The interesting thing is that congruence with music and the smiley can again affect your perception of the smiley. Horror music can actually increase the intensity of the sad smiley, and good happy music might actually improve the balance of a happy smiley. So this can actually be used in advertisements. We can design a lot of components. People have a very short attention span on the internet. Ads are flashing everywhere. Maybe something with sound and smileys can make a product more attractive. Again, this is not well tested, but it's an open possibility. This is just what the research outcome is. Okay, we are going to move on to the next application. This will be a little short. Font psychology. Basically, everything about how the written word is and how people interpret the information coming from everything which is not the word. So when we look at a word like research, we are really focusing on how the script is, not the meaning. Zero semantics. We're going to look at the curve of C, how the H is standing like a chair or actually a seat, how the S is, how the E can look like a single-eyed creature or Pac-Man to some people. We're going to look at that. So one very interesting finding is the interaction of sound and fonts. Let's do this here. I'm going to use this noise again in a couple of seconds. So one interesting finding is that caps lock demands more processing, which is not really good because that could strain someone. We know that it's requiring a lot more unusual perception because caps lock is not always present. It feels like shouting, it feels bold. We are again looking at some level of cross modality over here. The very nature that something is bold and big might be associated with something which is aggressive, something which is just ingrained in us. Plus, it requires more orthographic processing. That means that we are using more resources to just understand something which is basically shouting. Another interesting finding is that creative cognition, such as using a mixture of both divergent and convergent thinking, and the aesthetic aspects of, say, how emotion is associated with that, can be influenced by making your fonts pleasurable or maybe just good looking. Okay, so I'm going to use the sound again. So this is an interesting finding because attention can be split into multiple areas, and a hard to read font might require just enough attention and block out the noise or just have a defense against background noise, which is a good thing because a lot of classrooms can be noisy. A lot of cafes where people like to work can be noisy, and we can't always enforce some silence everywhere. It's just not in our control as a species. Noise exists. So maybe a harder to read font might benefit someone who's trying to study, say, in the afternoon outside or in the middle of a lunch break. So another study which reinforces this is basically for memory and harder to read fonts because again the demand was higher. For processing that information, it is better remembered. Okay, so if you are a designer and if you have looked at fonts or written online, you must have heard that Comic Sans is the biggest joke of all sorts of typography. It really isn't if you look at it from a psychological point of view because there are studies which show that Comic Sans performs better in terms of comprehension and reading fluency as compared to other fonts. So maybe if it is useful, it's not that big a joke. Another interesting finding is looking at satirical content and how people perceive that. If it is written in the font called Times New Roman, it's perceived funnier and angrier, which is basically what satire aims to do. It's a joke based on the human condition, it wants to make you laugh. It also is a little edgy. So maybe Times New Roman has some aspect, some cross-modal aspect which influences the emotions associated with satire. So let's go over a joke. Okay. Do you have an answer? Let's look at it. I found this on Reddit a couple of days ago. Okay, another quick review of something about fonts. There are two types of fonts in general, which are the most widely used and distinct. You see these tiny circle things over here? We call them serifs. They are the extra edges which bleed out of your letter. They are just extra. That tiny bit of extra in each character has a significant effect on how people interact with the information provided by a sentence. So far what we know is that serif fonts are actually it's better for remembering information which is probably novel, like the experiment which I'm highlighting here used biological information like animal classes and how creatures behave in a certain setting. Another application of the font is reading speed. Now something very interesting about reading online is that whoever wants to publish something online on a website, such as me who's a blogger, would want people to stay on their website for a longer time because then Google, who basically organizes all the information in the world, thinks that staying on this site is probably useful to the reader. So how long someone spends on a website is important to blogging professionals. So what can they do about that? We can manipulate it for reading speed. Now sans serif is something which is without those extra bits in each character. It's faster to read sans serif fonts. So what do? You use serif fonts. So people are a little slow in reading whatever there is on the screen. And that is useful to the blogging professional. It's just a minute difference, but it counts when the competition is strong. Yeah. How do we apply fonts? We can perhaps make better instructional manuals. Fonts, the Sans Forgetica. This is a real font designed based on research aimed at improving memory. All the points we covered are right here. None of the letters are complete, they have breaks. And that is because Filling in those breaks require a little more processing, which might promote memory. And they actually did a pilot study on 400 Australian graduates, I think, and they saw a significant effect of why this is useful. It's pretty weird. We don't have fonts like that, but maybe this is the result of research. And this is what we might start seeing more often. Okay, so this completes our presentation, and I've just listed a few other ways of applying. If we have time, we can go through those. Otherwise, we can go to the discussion.
You can go through this slide and then we'll go to discussion.
Okay, so quickly, let's go through this. Construal level is a concept which looks at the distance, the actual distance between information and how one perceives that information. I'll give you an example. When a person is saying, I need to use a cell phone for communication, we can assign a construal level to it. When you say cell phone, you instantly have the imagery of a mobile phone. But suppose I said something like, I want to use a communication device for communication. This makes the construal level drop. It makes what I'm talking about a little more abstract. The good thing about this abstraction is that it might promote various associations. Now, communication device could be a mobile phone, it could be a telegram, it could be chat, it could be Morse code, it could be anything, but it is not necessarily a cell phone. So this can be manipulated along with two other concepts. Neural reuse, which is using a learned neural circuitry for more than two different concepts. You can learn a process and you can use the same neural circuitry for another process. Now, neural reuse has a lot of evidence, so we probably can design a lot of metaphors for complicated subjects in, say, astrophysics or particle physics, which make it easier to understand with the help of the metaphor, which has the underlying neural circuitry which we want to reuse. That connected with the spreading activation model, which tells us that concepts can be linked in many sort of ways, and they can be clubbed together, and one can traverse a path of connecting ideas. So a quick short review of the other applications. Just to make someone a little more creative and make them learn better, what we can do is we can begin with high construal level, lower it, make it more abstract so that the person can think about other associations which might help learning. And on top of that, if it is complicated, we can use metaphors to further bolster that information in someone's head. This I find something which is quite useful in designing lectures or anything which is complicated, say design online courses for someone who is a non-expert. Okay, that's the end of this presentation. Citations are at the end, not citations, the researchers who came up with the original studies.
Okay, thank you very much. Great presentation. We have a couple of questions from the chat, but I wanted to selfishly give a question myself first. All right. So I wanted to ask you about the fonts and how it seems like the more difficult to read fonts like Sans Fregetica lead to improved memory for the content of the sentence, that sort of thing. Is this purely to do with the amount of time that someone takes to read through the sentence? Is it purely to do with the amount of time spent processing it?
That's actually quite interesting to ask because we don't know for sure if it is really related to the amount of time required or the general resources required. the area is quite new and there are not too many published papers in manipulating fonts for memory. Maybe a couple of dozen peer-reviewed papers at best. If time plays a cause and effect role over here, but we do know processing at a general holistic level plays a role.
I see. So in my mind, if I was given Sans Fregetica and an excerpt of text to understand, I would just be very annoyed with having to read through such a paragraph. I might process it better because of the amount of effort that I have to spend to read the paragraph.
That's right.
But I would hate whoever did that to me. And so I don't know if it's worth it to have better memory if you have to exert such an increased effort, and it might be better spent just rereading a passage. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think most people would do what you just said. And I think even I would do that. And I personally did not like Sans Fregetica, even though it is well supported by research. It's just a little unusual, and when we read something, we kind of want a pleasurable experience. So if we're going to feel strongly about the font that is in front of us, it might actually counteract the benefits. And as you said, rereading might be an option. So what do we do here? We use middle ground. We use something which is not repulsive. We might not want to use something which is extravagantly different, and just maybe manipulate a little bit, like using a font like Cursiva, which is something like cursive handwriting, or even a serif font, Georgia. I like that font quite a bit. It's slightly, just marginally harder to read than the regular sans serif fonts. So maybe I'd go with something of that sort. Try to maximize, say, the influence on memory and minimize emotional reactions to it.
Okay. And just a quick follow-up. You said that Comic Sans is a font that can lead to improved understanding despite people hating on Comic Sans, but Comic Sans is a really easy to read font. So how could Comic Sans improve understanding as a good font for teaching or something, but also be really easy to read?
One thing about Comic Sans is that it does not have a real center of gravity. The font is not held in place. It feels like it's wobbling out. It's just more, it feels childish at times. It could feel imperfect. You could feel the font is just not refined enough. Maybe these sort of aspects are contributing to the improved memory associated. As I said, we don't know what exactly is contained in the processing of fonts over here. This processing might improve memory. We could actually have some sort of correctional mechanism where we are forcing on the center of gravity to be stable just in our heads. It's something we can design an experiment for, but I don't think that's been done yet. Plus, Comic Sans really has a bad reputation. So maybe people feel strongly about it and they add more emotional balance to any content which is written in Comic Sans, even if it is negative.
Do you know of
contributes as well.
Do you know of any eye tracking studies that have looked at fonts and understanding?
Can you please repeat that?
Oh, yeah. Do you know of any studies that have looked at this, fonts and processing in terms of eye tracking, where people are looking when it comes to the words that they're reading?
I've not seen any study for fonts in particular, but I've seen for blocks of text, eye tracking studies for how people read content online. What we have, if I remember correctly, is that people read in what you call the F pattern, and they move across a sentence not in its logical format, but they will have fixation on blocks of text which grab attention, and then they'll snowball around it in any direction, regardless of how the sentence is. So while reading something, you would expect you would probably read a couple of sentences, then you will drop down, you'll scroll down, your eyes will follow. Then you will see a sentence which is probably attractive, or you just scrolled enough, read that sentence again, scroll down, skip the next few blocks. Another EF pattern that we know is prevalent in how people read, and you will see that in a lot of professional bloggers writing. They follow that F pattern.
Okay, I had to restart the stream because it cut out for a second, and I think it's good now. I think we're back now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up on what you just said about the S pattern of reading. Perhaps when it comes to the
F for box.
Oh, F pattern. Sorry. Yeah, F pattern. When it comes to the F pattern in terms of reading forward in the sentence, perhaps not linearly, when it comes to the harder to process fonts like Sans Fregetica, people may not be able to as easily go skip forward in sentences, and it might be harder to make these inferences about the words that they don't directly read and put their eyes on. But like you said, there's no studies that specifically look at that, but that might be one interesting conclusion that someone could go off and study.
Like that. Yeah, you could do that. My thesis on this, I would say that the amount of cognitive load or perceptual load there is interfere with a smooth experience.
I see. All right. Does anyone in the room have questions before we go to some of the chat questions? I guess not. So a couple of questions in the text chat. I think the first one about Kiki and Booba. What they might have been talking about is there's individual differences with Kiki Booba, I imagine. So maybe someone who has a stronger Kiki Booba effect, where they very strongly associate Kiki with the sharper, spikier shapes, for instance. Do you think that would translate to having a stronger cross-modal effect in the applied examples that you gave?
But that's a good question, and I think it would. Because what we know is that we do not really require semantic processing or a clear phonological processing or any sort of visual processing. That all of us have some level of a tendency over here, and this can be seen under experiments which try to present stimuli which are so fast that we can't really perceive them, but we might develop preferences and tendencies. So at this pre-conscious state, if we have a tendency to match Kiki to the shape, and same with Booba, on top of that, if we have a conscious, deliberate, or cognitive gets you to match them, a person is likely to look at these sort of nuances. For example, a lot of musicians look at these sort of things in trying to match lyrics to the sound. So they might find congruence or cross-modal connections where others ignore. It is possible that you have a more pronounced effect. There might be these individual differences.
Mm. And likewise, maybe someone is less prone to these cognitive effects in general in terms of advertising and the Kiki Booba effect, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah. So we know a whole population where this happens, and that's the autistic population. Mm-hmm. We know that Tiki Baba kind of fails when we are testing them. And what happens is that there's a very strong correlation with a lack of understanding of metaphor. So metaphor may be closely tied with the basic circuitry that allows cross-modality. because metaphor also depends on a lot of analogies, a lot of replacement of semantic content. We can call life a journey, you can call life a mountain to cross, you can call life an ocean. Everywhere, not everyone gets the depth of the meaning intended.
All right, so we have 5 minutes left. I think we'll end with 2 more questions, okay?
Okay.
One question was training, essentially. For instance, you cited one study that looked at reading in capitalized letters, right? What if you had trained people to be more familiar with, more practiced with reading in caps, or maybe reading with other fonts? What would that do to these cognitive effects, you think?
There's a high chance that the practice effect actually has an overriding power in terms of cognition. What I suspect here is that if one is trained to read in caps lock, there's a level of expectation and there's a level of automation in perceiving that stimuli. Would end up putting in much lesser effort in processing the information because we are so familiar with that already. And there is a level of prediction. You see caps lock and you see a little bit of the letter T, T for tree. Complete that. You don't have to process everything. So with training, I suspect that things will get easier to read even if caps lock is jarring to an untrained mind. Or any other font, in fact. It gets familiar, it gets easier, there's automation involved.
I see. And final question, there was one question someone asked about, have you studied repeatedly chanting mantras during meditation? For instance, do you think that repeating Om to yourself or some other mantra could affect cognition in some way?
I see. Wait, is this related to cross-modality or this outside the context?
I'm not sure. Maybe the viewer can elaborate. I'm assuming that it has to do with cross-modality of saying something out loud might, similar to like perception in like seeing a shape and associating it with Kiki or Booba, maybe saying something out loud can also influence cognition in some way.
Right, so the sound we make while having Om, just the vowel over here, is actually quite significant in terms of cross-modality because there is a pretty robust theory called sound symbolism, which has a small offshoot where the prediction is that the shape of the sound, the shape of the mouth while making a sound might contribute to its abstract nature. This means that maybe the shape you make and the sound coming out might have a cross-modal association. Personally speaking, I find Om a very easy to speak sound. And it's quite intuitive. The airflow is pretty smooth. Depending on how you are trained in meditation, there might be nuances to saying Om. I'm not aware of those, but if you ask a layperson, say Om is pretty easy. You start with a smooth, uprising curve, and then you kill the curve with a pretty sharp end. It feels like a full stop, and then you can repeat that. I'm not entirely certain if I can comment on what sort of effect saying Om has on cognition in general, but this is what I think in terms of cross-modality.
I see. Yeah, I never really considered Om as being a smooth sound and that may be helping with wanting to have a smooth meditation experience, but interesting to think about. Anyway, let's give a last round of applause for Aditya. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, OnNeuro.
You're very welcome.
So exciting.
Yeah, I think this was a very helpful and interesting look at cognitive psychology and perhaps a more practical domain than most researchers think about, and it may be a more useful domain for people who aren't as into the research end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And, we need the researchers to
yes,
do the work.
Of course, of course. So if you want to check out more of Aditya's work and findings, you can go to his blog at cognitiontoday.com, right?
That's correct.
And if you would like to stay updated about future presentations, please join our mailing list at OnNeuro.com. And thanks everyone for joining us.